Hi folks, Josh Knight the First here with another episode of Exade Replay, coming to you with episode 43 of the series. Let's get right into it. So here we are, only 2 episodes left after this week's episode. I'm really getting hesitant to see this series go, but I know we've got to get there. I know they're showing us a lot of promos for True Ending at the beginning, but that doesn't mean a lot right now. We have to focus on the story right now, which is this new problem that Cronus has created. So if you thought last week that they had managed to suppress the Gamedeus strain of the virus, you were wrong. Apparently, it has evolved thanks to the events of last week's episode. Now, I'm actually glad for that. Thinking that there wasn't a virus problem for the next 2 episodes, that kind of weirded me out, so I'm actually okay with the fact that everybody is still infected. This, of course, means Kiria from last week having exposed himself to the virus. He is now infected. Miyu Sawai, who was the guest star from last week, she's back this week, although in a reduced role, but everybody is still infected. We still have to deal with Gamedeus Cronus. Now, of course, Gamedeus Cronus is what we're calling Cronus now that he has infected himself with Gamedeus. He's this alt-color version who now has all of the power of the Bugster combatants that we saw Gamedeus displaying before, but it seems he's also learned a few tricks. If you remember a couple of episodes back when Exade and Paradox were fighting Cronus, they used the pause against him. Well, here he seems to have learned from that and uses that against Exade when, of course, Snipe and Brave are helping him fight. Now, I think it's an interesting turn in this episode in that we see that the focus of the episode isn't so much our main character, Emu, it's actually going to be more Taiga and to a certain extent Nico. Now, for Nico, it makes sense, since she's technically the player that's made it the furthest in Kamen Rider Chronicle. She becomes the focus of Gamedeus Cronus because she's the one to get to the furthest to the end. She has to be the one to go ahead and take him down. Now, admittedly, this does present a problem. If you're looking at the series the way I've been looking at it, technically Nico didn't get to where she got on her own. She's had the help of Snipe from this whole time, and of course other Kamen Riders subsequently. So when it comes time for her to actually face off against Gamedeus Cronus, I don't think she's exactly the best equipped for it. And there's a reason they bring that up, because the thing about it is, the person who has to take on Gamedeus Cronus has to have beaten all the other strains of the Bugster virus. Admittedly, Nico has been infected to 2 strains, but I don't think that makes her the best equipped. This actually focuses things on Tyga, since story-wise, he's been the one who's been through it the most over the last 5 years. And the thing of it is, if you didn't know any better going into this episode, you'd swear that Tyga was the main character. He's been the one with this grudge to bear, thinking that because he couldn't suppress the virus 5 years ago, this is all his fault. Meanwhile, you have to take into account that everything else that's been going on in the series has happened with Emu, with Masamune, with Kuroto, so the weight isn't entirely all on him. Things were already in effect up until that point, but I do see how they're trying to push him as the thing that moves the narrative forward this week. Now, to further push this point, they say that in order to beat Gamedeus Cronus, you have to have gotten past all the other strains of the Bugster virus, like I just said. Well, Tyga decides to go ahead and inform the audience that he's been developing his own immunity for the last 5 years. Now, it was one thing for Masamune to say that for his explanation for why he could become Cronus, but for Tyga to say that 2 episodes before the end, I don't know, I feel that that's kind of cheap. You kind of figure that we would have talked about that earlier on and we just would have forgotten about it, but here to just say that is almost its own sort of Deus Ex Machina, I'm not so cool with that, but I get it. He's supposed to be the main character for this episode, so we need him to go ahead and fight Gamedeus Cronus, albeit with a new form. And that form is achieved by using 2 copies of Kamen Rider Chronicle in a gamer driver to become his own version of Kamen Rider Cronus. Here he has access to all of the other Gashikon weapons that we've seen throughout the series, so anything Genmu, Snipe, Brave, Laser has used, he has access to. And the fight is fairly decent for the most part, but the thing is, it's all for naught, because the whole idea of this is that it has to be a team effort. The idea of pushing this forward, because again, this is a kids series, we have to focus on the team effort, the building up to something of more of a happy ending. I do think Tyga should get the ending that he deserves, but I think it's kind of detracted from a little bit when basically Brave and Exade have to come in and save him. And yes, it is nice that he's talking about how badly he does want to be a doctor, even after all this time, even after he lost his license. But the thing of it is, at the end of the day, he's always been a doctor. He's always been there to treat other patients. Yeah, he might have been a little jerkish. Heck, you could say Hiro did the same thing early on, but after a while, their true colors came through. If you want to be a doctor, that's dedicating years upon years of your life to this profession, and that doesn't go away that quickly. Even if you had some problem with the Bugsters, even if you had some problem losing your girlfriend, which, yeah, we finally got over with Hiro, you still want to be a doctor after all this time. So when we see that he's finally accepted back as a doctor, I don't think that hits nearly as emotionally hard as it could either, because at the end of the day, he's still that character no matter what. Now, of course, there's the question of how exactly did Hiro and Emu get out there to the game field, since apparently they didn't get as far in as Tyga did. Well, that of course is thanks to Kuroto Dan, using his godlike powers in exchange for basically a pardon. So he develops a cheat code, which we never actually see how they implement that, to get them onto the field. Now, this is where we get the bulk of the comedy for this episode, and yes, it makes sense that most of the comedy comes from either Laser or Kuroto nowadays, but the thing about it is he could have been a combatant. At this point, since we're getting so close to the end, I'm wondering why we're seeing fewer writers focused on when there's so many available. Yes, I get that's why we have True Ending, that's why we're going to have the major fight next week, but I still think it's important that we see them fighting all together even now. And you can see, even on the sidelines, Pallad is talking to Poppy about how he's going to make amends for everything that he's done, and she's telling him, well, we have to save lives. The thing of it is, the best way for them to save lives is to help fight Cronus, so why aren't they doing that? This doesn't make any sense. Now, we do see that Gamedeus Cronus was technically defeated by a triple attack from those three riders, but nobody's cured yet. We don't see that reprieve that we got last week. But we also see something that's very JRPG-ish, and I'm glad that they did it, and that we're still seeing more of this isn't even my final form out of Gamedeus Cronus, as he transforms into a giant monster form referred to as Super Gamedeus. Now the thing is, we're getting to the end, we have to up the stakes, so what happens now as a result of Super Gamedeus being introduced onto the field is that everybody that we've seen infected with his strain of the Bugster virus subsequently becomes a Bugster, and just by touch, they can transform someone else into a Bugster. It's very kind of zombie-esque in that way. Not dangerous zombie-esque, just kind of a reference, if you will. But the thing of it is that raises the stakes even further. That means everybody in the Tokyo metropolitan area is at risk. That's why we need the writers to go ahead and take care of this as soon as possible. And that'll of course lead into next week's episode, where we're pretty much getting to the final battle. We have all of the writers on the field. We see Poppy trying to do something out of suit, and from what I can see from other commercials, Build will show up a little bit early, so we're going to have that to look forward to as well. But yes, we're down to the wire here. I like certain things in this episode. I like the fighting for the most part. The choreography was decent. I appreciate for another week we see Saiba Nico's actress giving us real tears. She really feels the emotion for everything that Tyga is doing for her. I'm actually glad that from the outset, when I didn't necessarily like her character, she's actually grown on me quite a bit, and that has a lot to do with the writing and the execution, so good on her for that part. But these are all my thoughts for this week. I want to hear what you guys thought, so let's go ahead and talk about this. First off, the multiple forms for Gamedeus Cronus. Do you think that's too many forms, or should he technically have more by the end of the series? Secondly, Poppy and Paradox. Do you think they should be in on the fights too, or is it okay that we're only focusing on Snipe, Brave, and Exade? And lastly, the Dr. Mighty Double X Gashot that we were technically sold last week. For them to tell us 1 week later that it doesn't work, do you feel kind of cheated by that, or no? Are you still going to buy it? You tell me in the comments below. And of course, during the week, you can always talk to me over on social media. On Twitter, I'm at JoshKnight1st. This has been episode 43 of Exade Replay for episode 43 of the series, White Coat License. I'm Josh Knight the First. I'll see you guys again next week.